question to those that are observing cults. This is a question. This is from the perspective of someone that experienced the cult firsthand. But consider the members that wanted to leave. Imagine if there was a possibility of interviewing current members or members still engaged with the cult. And if you were able to ask them, did you ever want to leave the cult? Or how many times have you ever thought of leaving? How many times have you attempted to leave the cult? What was your thinking and reasoning process around leaving the cult? Perspective is really, really something. One of the patterns in these cults is separation and isolation. So if you are in another country, or even as the cult members, the cult leader can look to target members or to get new recruits in the country or the place that they're in, which would make sense because if you can secure new recruits in a new area, new state, or new country, then those folks can be the liaison between the cult leader and the cultural differences and the new environment. The cult member or new recruit can be the person that goes around to the market, that speaks the local language or the patois or the different language, or can go secure supplies, create relationships, gain interest and access to younger people, or can put their eye out for people of younger age or who would be ideal new recruits. There's a separation and an isolation that goes on, especially when one is going from one country to another. That's a huge difference. That's a huge difference. That's a huge distinction, going from one country to another where there may be one or several other languages because you are out of your element. The money is different. The infrastructure is different. For example, the types of services or social services, whether that's domestic abuse, is different. The police force or where you would go to get consequences or results or some legal help or protection is totally different in another country. So this is one of the reasons why I say that we're speaking, often we're triggered and we're speaking from a very limited perspective. Another pattern inside of these cults is, and as I sometimes, if I'm up early before I go into the garden, I'm cleaning. Every now and then when I tune in, it's astounding. Every time I research other cults, the patterns are consistent. And sometimes, which is very disturbing when I think back, as someone that's at a different age group, in a different age group, right? The 19-year-olds, the teenagers and 20s is totally different than someone as the mother or mama, I don't want to mention her name, but the older woman that was in one of these popular cults that has transitioned. Two different things. A more mature person chronologically can still be manipulated or based on insecurities or health diagnoses. But in any event, the separation is astounding. And I think it makes me think of how much culturally we have a tendency to adultify teenagers. Their thinking and reasoning process in children is not the same. They don't have a frame of reference for what they're dealing with. There is no way somebody in their teens or their 20s it's not that they, are these ideal human beings. That's not the point. We have a tendency to adultify. That's something that we're not looking at culturally. Perhaps it comes from our collective trauma, but we have a tendency to adultify young people, especially young women. It is absolutely astounding. And the distinction is when I think of the older women in the cult, And I think of the older women and the senior women, and even the older men. They play a very critical role in the grooming process. They play a critical role in the grooming process. I'm so disturbed, when certain things started to occur to me, and certain patterns that were off. When I would ask very clear, pointed questions, I was given rhetoric. So that was a huge red flag, because I'm asking very clear questions. How do we do this? What's the protocol when you have conflict? I asked very clear, simple questions, and I was constantly given rhetoric, and I was given more and more runaround. Towards the end of my tenure at the cult, then I started to get straight ridiculous answers. And I'm not 19, 20, 30, so I can discern the okey doke. Now, the insecurities, after a while, you may have insecurities, but you can still distinguish if something off. However, by that time, if you've been for a long enough process, because you're going through a conditioning process, in the case of what I experienced, the lingo, the language of is, and I haven't even repeated a long time. You're always told, if you don't understand something, you have to detox and purge to heal. Or when I would ask questions, haven't you read the book yet? You need to go back and read the book. So it would be somewhat isolated, reading these thick books of his rhetoric, which was the same stuff phrased over and over. So he didn't have time for you at certain points. Initially, when you come in, the cult leader, and more so the wives, especially as someone as a woman, they would, he would work. You would feel so special to have these special private meetings with him. And he was constantly having private meetings with different members of the cult. Now, all of this I don't go on to say, because there's a triggeration, is the word I'm going to call it. And it's such a lack of immaturity. And there's such in the climate online. And we have such a desire to hold on to these concepts. We are married to these ideals, and I get why. It's almost like this is all we got left, or these ideals, these romantic ideals of our culture. And so we're holding on to a romanticism of people who we don't know. There were constant private meetings in the pyramids with the high priest and the queen, if not the queen mother, rarely the queen mother, but the two top women, the Oshami, use the different tradition. We feel so good to use our traditional African words, and trying to bring back parts of the culture. But it's being exploited, just like elements of truth are being exploited. So the grooming process is carried on most definitely by the senior members that are closest to, in this case, the high priest. Anytime somebody's calling themselves a high priest, it's a red flag. Initially, I could care less what somebody calls themselves. I'm more concerned about the treatment. And you don't really know someone until you have lived with them. And when you're living there, you're told that they're protecting their children. That makes sense. If you go and you visit someone's home, you don't go stay in the bedroom with their children. I get that. But a lot of the rhetoric you were given, when you stay long enough, you can see the contradictions. For example, we were told, you surrender your computer and all of your devices when you come in, because we don't want to expose the children. Well, then when I look around periodically, I see we're riding, on a ride to or from the airport. I see different members with their phones, or I see different people engaging with the computers. Not all the time. I just saw so many contradictions that were off. And all of them I'm not going to say here. I would never intend, in general, for any harm to directly come to anyone. I'm not so Pollyannish that I don't think to put it past people what people will do when they are married to a concept in terms of defending and upholding this ideal. And that can get very, very dangerous. So I'm unapologetic about, when it comes to defending myself and understanding how sloppy and messy people can be, on the internet. So not everything is to be said, because the climate, the general climate, is immaturity and entertainment. It is what it is. Some people will look to educate themselves on the patterns, and many won't. There are many people still married to the idea. When I think of when I come back and I think of the adults that, even when I spoke to numerous ones, and I'm sure they check into this channel, And they had doubts themselves. These very people had doubts themselves. But when I think of what folks across the spectrum are willing to do to hold on to a concept, whether that be raw foods or the idea of culture, or this is the only thing that's going out here, everything else has failed with Black people, so this is the one thing, that's working. So what the cult leader or this so-called father figure, or what this whole cult is representing, is a Black utopia, and it disregards it. It's deflected. It doesn't acknowledge the deviancy in human beings. And we have a tendency, this pedestalizing people that we don't know. I've spoken to family members, numerous family members of the cult. There's so much you don't know. More children that they haven't taken care of, these fantastical stories. Then there's a lot of people you'll never see come to the surface in these cults, especially when it comes to the older G's. These are the new cult leaders. So they're a little bit more sloppy and messy and immature. But the older ones, and if people, they have their thinking caps on, first of all, there's one main one that they all sprout off of. But the older ones, they've had enough experience. They sit back late in the cut. There's several of them. If people were paying attention, would ask questions and look to see the pattern, they're sitting right underneath everybody's nose. We were so entertained by these soap operas that we miss it. And there are always going to be people that are dysfunctional, or feel ostracized or looking for an escape. There are always going to be people that go to the cults. It is. I'm an acceptance of that. Right now, there's enough information that you can research. But there's also a lot. There's a lot of people that are never going to come, that have passed through these cults, that are never going to come to the surface because they see the climate. They're not necessarily speaking, and speaking to strangers. They're not really speaking to anyone necessarily that can help them. So why put themselves and expose their lives? Why put it out there? Why? Now, for people that have experienced these cults, there are some that may be courageous enough to say, you know what? I don't want to mislead people in going there. I don't want to I know I didn't. I don't want to mislead. I don't care how much raw foods and red, black, and green. I can't in integrity. I can't ignore the absolute control. I can't ignore the fact that other folks that came in there, which I'm not going to mention the names for their safety, that came in there. One day we see a whole family, we knew something was off, is disappearing. We're called into another meeting with the so-called high priest, and this family's on their way out, disappearing, and we're told we can't go speak to them. When not, it was just the control was crazy. It was so triggering. Then as this next family is leaving, we're asked for more money. It was just so nuts and crazy. This is what you will never see online. You'll never see. So the best I can tell you, I invite you to press pause on who your favorite, whoever. And at this particular point, the vetting process applies to every religious leader, politician, somebody shouting red, black, and green. We're so enamored by information that is absent of character. And we refuse to vet people. We will refuse to vet people. Yeah, some probably want to help others. And even with the help, it makes sense that you need to have a protective, some healthy boundaries for yourself with all of these strangers on the internet, because there's a lot of mental, emotional instability, and people cling on to these cult leaders. And when you've invested yourself so deeply, we have seen now, there's a gentleman right now who's speaking out. He's revealing a lot. I've seen numerous people come out of these cults. They reveal something and then they went right back. So I'm always fascinated by what is that process to catapult you back in. The cult that I experienced, there was one people would never know. Women there with double degrees, some of them left. Even the cult members don't know everything about the people that's sitting right next to them. And by the time you are given access to the information about other people, you're in deep. So now the two of you almost have a bond of secrecy, and it gets twisted into we're protecting the family. But when it's really, for example, I was leaving, I already had a child in there. I would have to leave my child, especially as a mother. Now you're kind of locked in, and you treat it constantly like crap because of the fact that you're so smart and sharp, and so you spoke out so much. Once you decide to stay, all your resources are gone. You have a child in there. You'll likely always be treated like crap. And you have to be broken. You have to be broken in the sense of broken in. In order for you not to get a constant hazing, and there will always be a hazing, you have to show submission within the cult. So all is to say, just one other point. This gentleman just remarked on, you had to neglect yourself. And, it just brings back memories. I remember once sitting in the Royal Hall, which was a big hall, it's open. Again, it's really out in nature, in this so-called Royal Hall and so-called part of the Central American rainforest, that we romanticize. That's neither here or there. And rainy season, bugs come out. I remember sitting in a Royal Hall in the evening, and there were cockroaches everywhere. When I think back, they were I was just surrounded on the floor by cockroaches. Now, the thing is, we could say, oh, you could say that's a natural environment. But there was this thing of you want to prove how much you could withstand, how much of a hazing you could withstand. Men and women do this. It's like you want brownie points, you want the acknowledgement, you're holding on to a concept, you're proving how much of a hazing you can withstand to show that you're really one of the family. And in order for you to get to be able to eat with the royal family, you sit aside from the royal family. It's like this constant thing of you trying to show that you're worthy of sitting in the inner circle. So y'all folks don't really know what's going on inside these cults. This is why there are playlists that were created a long time ago. They've been sitting here forever, so that you could look at cults, white, black, Korean, whole playlist. Look at them. And I invite you not to be afraid to look at the ones that are in a packaging that look like you. The different, so you can see objectively, so you can see there are distinct patterns that are consistent. The isolation, the humiliation in public, even if that public is within the cult, there's constant humiliation. You can't speak, to other people. That control is a big red flag, and then the cult leader says, I'm not doing. The cult leader I experience is technically legally blind. So he can't do anything without having some henchmen of protection around him. He can't move around here without his wives. In one sense, that wouldn't be wrong. It's the control and the manipulation. If you knew the ages of the wives that came in there, some of those women weren't even intended to be his wives. So without putting all that out there, first, if you don't know everything, it's hard for you to make sense of what you're seeing. And then by the same token, just enough for you to understand the patterns and to ask the right questions and to educate yourself. But that humiliation piece, the neglecting of yourself, sometimes I remember, we were all natural, not a problem. Bathing in creek water, not a problem. I remember once, and I'll just leave it here. It was a lot for you to go out to get an internet signal. Never mind the fact that years ago I gave like $3,000 US for them to have donated for them to have internet to get it fixed. And they gave me all kind of runaround story. It was never there, right? Who knows what they did with the money? They showed me banana trees. When I finally came to stay in Central America, banana trees don't cost anything. Banana trees grow freely. In any event, it's just so much. Sometimes my mind is blown. My mind is blown. So yeah, I don't know if I can even go into all of that here, on the internet. But no, there's a lot of isolation. There's a lot of humiliation. Folks that are in it are in deep. I encourage the parents of adults and adult children in cults to look at other cults, because if you're so close to it, you're so worried about your children. You just want to see them healthy and happy. You don't have a clue. And I'm very well aware that some of your children have told you straight up and down on the advice of the cult leader to mind your business. And so their children have told them straight out to mind your business. I know of family members that have said to the cult leader, I want you out of my son's head. And now, just a matter of time, while now that those family members are used to groom other family members into the cult. So some are much more savvy and mature. This is not the new sloppy ones. These new young ones are real sloppy. The old the OGs are on a whole nother level. That's how, the older ones that had the temples and the pyramids were able to get so big. A lot of it is a similar formula, and people have broken off and done their own versions. So I invite you just to keep your thinking caps on, parents of those in cults. And I get it. Sometimes you got to move on. Some parents are just in acceptance. There's nothing. They may feel like there's nothing I can do and that I'm alone, and that's a lot for a parent. Oh, the last thing, I know what I was going to say. I remember once I was on my menstrual cycle, and we were all natural. We were bathing with lime, and we had to go out to get an internet signal, which was a hard thing to do. That was a whole big production. And the other women had Lyme, and we're newer, me and my other female family member. And we weren't even given Lyme to bathe ourselves. We had our menstrual cycle. We were really like, in a bush environment. And so it was a long journey to go out. And we had to smell ourselves, right? In this heat. And we made our own menstrual pads. I was awful on that. But we're sitting and we couldn't even get a piece of lime to bathe ourselves. So when you talk about neglect, and so everything was, once we came back from a trip to do our paperwork for immigration and stuff, and we just told, oh, we had a meeting while you were gone, and we decided everybody's going to wear all white. So things were dripped in terms of the control, because the other ones, some of the other initiates are wearing white. So not everybody will have to wear white. So there are ways that it's the manipulation and the control, and you don't have a say. And as I was told by the Queen Mother, you're just supposed to trust the high priest. I was thinking with my common sense, I trust people to a point. Trust is earned on all parts, not just given freely because of your assumed position. But I was also told, one thing I know about Sister K, she's just going to follow the group. This is what was said to me. This is the gaslighting. And folks know how deep gaslighting can get. And it's like we're being gaslit on all sides, especially when you look at these so-called conscious channels. There's such a lack of maturity, communications, because folks are just married to the information. And it seems that just being enamored by the information and astrology has become escapism at this point. All the information that is tossed back and forth, like Don King boxing matches, the information and the rhetoric and the astrology has become escapism. Keep your thinking caps on, folks. Create a great day on purpose.